Morrowind, the fifth game in the Elder Scrolls series, the third main titled game. For quite some time, people have been asking me to make a What If Morrowind is Good? And that's because for the better part of a year I've been producing a series called What If Skyrim Was Good, which started with What If Oblivion Was Good? So people wanted to hear my opinions on how Morrowind could be made better. And unlike those other series, where I literally said, it's never going to happen, Morrowind's a little bit different. And that's because a very talented team over at OpenMW.org has been producing the Open Morrowind engine. To put this simply, an open-sourced engine is something where you can go to a GitHub, download the source code, make your own tweaks, and then compile your own version of that open-sourced product. It's not limited to games, there's open-sourced everything. And open source opens the doors to all kinds of innovations because people look at someone's code and say, you know, this would be better if we made this, and that tweaks. And those tweaks happen. All it takes is a talented programmer, and games like OpenMW can change forever. And in this case, what I'm going to be doing is not stating the quote-unquote ideal Elder Scrolls as something that could never happen, but rather an appeal to any sort of programmers who are listening to this and maybe want to think, yeah, I could do that. Now, many of what I'm going to be talking about may be covered by existing mods, but not implemented in the best way possible. Some of the existing mods will contain scripting errors, or dirty edits, or other things which could be completely eliminated by simply integrating them into the engine. Some of these aren't specific to OpenMW, some of these might be completely doable with regular Morrowind. But either way, I'm just stating my ideal Elder Scrolls 3. Now, one of the early questions I'm going to get, of course, is why don't I just play Skyrim or Skywind? And the reason is because we're not looking for haphazardly placed workarounds like Tamriel Online, for instance, where you puppet an NPC on the other person's computer. No, we're looking for integrated, workable, and non-crashing solutions. We're looking for something tailored to the game. Things we can accomplish with the game's source code that we can never do with the closed source Skyrim, unless someone wants to make an open Skyrim. Good luck on that. So without further delay, here is the list of changes that I personally would like to see done to Morrowind. Number 1. The number one grief most people have with Morrowind is that it looks dated. Now, the Morrowind graphics extender handles most of these problems. Obviously, we need the Morrowind graphics extender in our Open Morrowind. Currently, many of the changes work, but the shaders don't, and we need those shaders desperately. But you know what? That's something I have faith will happen. No, my number one is actually animations. So maybe not a programmer, more like an artist could maybe design some better humanoid models, you know what I mean? When a character's walking around, they look like they pooped their pants. And that's unfortunate to say the least, but it shows that we've come a long way in terms of 3D modeling. I would very much like to see about Oblivion or Skyrim quality 3D models put into my Morrowind. That would make me happy. Now, I personally am not a stickler for graphics. What I mean to say is I play games like Daggerfall where it's 2D sprites, I play Doom, I play Quake, I play text-based MMORPGs such as Lensmore. Look it up, lensmore.org. Their website recently went down, but it's still there. And either way, that's a text-based MMO. The point is, to me personally, graphics don't mean shit, but to a lot of people they do. And full integration of the Morrowind graphics extender's shaders, coupled with better models for both the characters and for the one-handed animations, would change the game drastically for a lot of people and make it more accessible to newcomers. Now you notice I said more accessible to newcomers and not completely accessible to newcomers. The reason is because of the dice-based combat system. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating its outright removal. I know there are a lot of people saying, dice have no place in an action RPG. Like, Of course they do. Dice represent your character's abilities, not your own. And that's very important because you are not the elite Twitch person in the game, your character is. And that's the whole point of playing an RPG, is that you are taking on the role of this other character that you've created. But my problem is that I physically see my blade pass through the enemy, and then it makes this little swish sound, and they receive no impact as a result. It bothers the crap out of me. So, number one, I want to make misses extremely rare. And if a miss does happen, it should prompt the NPC to do a dodge animation so that the blade doesn't actually pass through them. The NPC should maybe move slightly to the side and then go back to their original position, maybe not even their hitbox, just their 3D model. Just a physical representation of the fact that not only didn't you hit them, but it's very clear you didn't hit them. Not a situation where you have to pretend like you saw them dodge it, or you fumbled on your face and fell down, which you clearly didn't do. So the former cavalcade of misses should be changed. They should now be referred to as glancing blows. And based on the dice-based mechanics, I would say have it entirely based on your primary stat for the skill, be it agility or strength or whatever, based on the weapon you're using, the weapon skill itself, and several other factors, versus their armor and their defensive skills. You should be able to create a subtraction value where it subtracts roughly 90% of the damage you deal. Either way, these glancing blows wouldn't stagger the opponent in the way that regular attacks do in vanilla Morrowind. So the enemy would continue to hit you regardless, but you would definitely have this feedback that you hit them, and their health would definitely respond to that. Instead of just looking down at a rat and going swish, swish, swish as your blade clearly passes through it. That is the biggest turnoff for new players in Morrowind, and it needs to be fixed. It doesn't need to be replaced like Oblivion or Skyrim did, it just needs to be fixed. Now, staggers. I hate staggering in Morrowind. Stunlock is something evil. It's something World of Warcraft pretty much did away with the concept of diminishing returns. Now, I don't want diminishing returns in my Morrowind, I just want staggers to be limited to critical hits. And I love the concept of critical hits, where you suddenly just do half the enemy's health in a single strike because, you nearly decapitated them or you cut through an artery or something. That's awesome. And I think that should stagger people, not normal attacks. If you stagger too much, it makes the game too easy for you. If you get staggered too much, it makes the game frustrating for you. Ultimately, I think that critical hits having the stagger would be the happy middle line for it. Finally, as far as combat system goes, I would say that blocking should be an activated ability, not an automatic one. What that means is you'd have a block button, and as long as you held up the block button, you'd be engaging a dice roll for blocking. Now, unlike Oblivion and Skyrim where you take damage for a blocked attack, I'd want your shield to take damage in your stead. If the shield breaks, well then you're screwed. Obviously Daedric items wouldn't break, so if you get yourself a Daedric shield somehow, congratulations, you've got yourself a virtually unbreakable shield. I don't want to say an unbreakable shield. I'd allow the durability to go down slowly, but definitely over the course of several hours as opposed to a couple combat sessions. And of course, the relics, the really big relics, I wouldn't have them degrade at all, so you found Ariel's shield, congratulations. You don't have to worry about degradation anymore, because that shield belongs to a god. Now, a dice roll still does engage, though. Now, if you failed the dice roll, you would receive a portion of the damage. And you would also get staggered, indicating that your block basically failed and your own shield bashed you in the face. It would be a small portion of the damage, maybe 10%, but the stagger would leave you open to an additional attack by the enemy. Thus, you'd be taking 10% more damage than you took. You'd have your own bash in the face, 10%, coupled by the second strike. However, that said, what I would do is I would have a timed blocking system. For 0.5 seconds after you put your shield up, you would have basically a 90% chance of success. You know, it would be greatly increased if you timed your block almost immediately to when they attacked you. Now, this bonus would have a 1.2 second cooldown internally. So if you held up your shield, you'd have 0.5 seconds of supreme block because you timed it just right. You're basically taking your shield and you're smacking them in the face with it, more or less, or smacking their weapon with your shield. You're meeting it. And as a result, you are putting your body weight into the defense, and that's where you're going to get most of your defense from. That is, you're going to get that bonus roll. After that, you're just basically holding your arm up, and so it's going to rely on your base block skill from that point on. However, as I said, the internal 1.2 second cooldown, what that means is if you put your shield up, then you put it down, then you put it back up, if it's within 1.2 seconds, you're not going to get that initial block bonus, meaning that you can't just spam the button repeatedly. You're going to have to somewhat time it. And that's about it. Make those minor changes, and I will love the combat system and recommend it to pretty much everyone. Again, I don't want to abolish the dice-based mechanics, but I want to integrate them into the 3D world better, to better represent that you, the player, have skill, yes, and you, the player, having skill should be rewarded, but at the same time, you have to understand that the character that you are controlling isn't you. It has its own set of skills, and that's very important. It's what separates an RPG from just a regular action game. Now, my third recommendation is to rework the stamina system. What I mean by that is when you run. You see, Morrowind has two states. There's walking and running. Walking, you regenerate stamina. Running, you lose stamina. The problem is that Morrowind's walking is more or less the vanity walking system from other games. Morrowind's running system is the default movement speed for other games. And then other games have a sprinting system. Well, what I would like to do is I would like to see just a minor tweak. I still want you to regenerate stamina while you're walking. I'd like to see while you're jogging, your stamina regeneration be cut to 0. You wouldn't lose stamina per se, and I realize that isn't realistic, but ultimately realism has to fall to video game mechanics and make sure that the game is fun. If the game's not fun, then there's no point in doing any of this. So I'd like to see your normal Morrowind movement system simply reduce your stamina regen to 0. Thus, you could jog over to something and be ready for combat. That's the biggest problem is, while you're traveling, combat happens. If your stamina's at 0 when combat begins, you're probably going to be in trouble. That's where massive amounts of stamina potions are consumed in spells to restore your stamina, so on and so forth. It's kind of irritating. The final change I'd like to see is the use of a speed boost, specifically hold Alt to sprint. It's something that Skyrim implemented, it works very well, and I'd like to see it drain your stamina rather rapidly, but based on your athletic skills. So as your athletic skill goes up, you'll be able to sprint for longer with a slower stamina drain. So you'll have to choose between jogging forever, sprinting for a while, then walking for a while, sprinting for a while, then walking for a while. And ultimately, the first option, that is jogging forever, would be more reasonable at lower athletic skill. But as you jog and get your athletic skill up, you'll eventually reach a threshold where it's definitely reasonable to sprint for, say, 2 minutes and then go back to walking for, about 30 to 45 seconds in order to sprint again. This would give non-magical characters who don't want to load up on potions an option for higher leveled gameplay. Personally, I still think that potions, scrolls, things like that are very helpful for the early game and should always be very helpful for the early game. Very simple change. Mods do it already. I'm using a mod myself called GCD, which is a character development mod, which includes this already. But very simply put, the game needs Magicka regeneration. And the level of Magicka regeneration should be based on the factors that determine your overall Magicka as well as your magic skills. So, if you had, say, 4 major magic skills, then you would have a higher Magicka regeneration than someone who has, say, 2 major magic skills. And if you had a Magicka-based birth sign, such as the Mage or the Apprentice, you should have a faster Magicka regeneration rate. If you are a High Elf, you should have a faster Magicka regeneration rate. All these factors should work in, including your active skills. So maybe Destruction is a miscellaneous skill. You didn't specialize in it, but you got it way up high, like to 80. The game should recognize that and, again, give you a bonus to your Magicka. So these factors should combine to where if you have no Magicka skills whatsoever, say you've got like 5 Destruction, 5 Illusion, so on and so forth, your birth sign is the Warrior, everything about you screams, I beat things with my fists. Maybe you should have a very, very slow Magicka regeneration rate. All I'm saying is we should come up with a formula. I'm not telling you what that formula is, but I'd like to see this more built into what kind of character you developed for yourself, instead of the generic basic system you see in other games. So that's pretty much it. Next, I'd like to see better enemy pathfinding. I want to see enemies stop getting stuck on rocks, on signs. I want to see them stop, back up, and get around things. I want to see them, if for any reason they can't pathfind to you, they cannot physically get to you, they don't know levitate, whatever, they should run away. Get out of line of sight. They should not allow themselves to be sniped from atop rocks or pillars. They should just basically be smarter. And thus, you feel like you're going up against more intelligent enemies. And that comes into my next point. I want NPCs to be able to jump. During combat only. If the obstacle is small enough for the player to get over, I want the NPC to be able to get over it too. I want to see if a player jumps up on a rock, not the NPC to go around this convoluted path to get up there, but rather for the NPC to do it too. NPCs with bows should more reliably be able to take you out from areas that, you know, they can see you, but they can't physically get to. I feel that this requires some very simple checks for, you know, switch to bow, shoot them with bow. So the next thing that I would need is a Skyrim-esque sneaking system. Morrowind's sneaking system is kinda shit. It allows you to sneak up on enemies and perform actions while sneaking that they won't notice. But ultimately, once an enemy has been aggroed, that's it. It's after you forever. It's also locked onto your position from satellite. The first thing that needs to happen is NPCs need to have 2 states. An alert state and a combat state. An NPC that can't see you when you initiate a sneaked attack should enter an alert state. In other words, it doesn't instantly aggro on you. It goes, there's stuff going on, I need to see this enemy in order to enter a combat state. So the NPC will seek out the location to where the player was when the player initiated that attack. So the NPC would go around a pillar, for instance, and then it would initiate a search protocol, as it were. The NPC would search the surrounding area for about, 1 to 2 game hours before they'd give up. Then it would put an internal check on the NPC. An NPC that is aggroed a second time would search for 8 hours. And then an NPC that was aggroed for a third time would probably be locked onto you from orbit and continue to look for you. The concept that it was just my imagination should only happen once. Obviously, after a cell reset occurred, maybe 30 game hours, something like that, you'd remove the ticks and the NPC would revert to being normal again. But ultimately, if the NPC sees you, the NPC would aggro and everything would happen as normal. But this sneaking system would be more involved and it would give you potential sneak skill ups while the NPC was looking for you. I just have an issue with the fact that there isn't a middle state where the NPC is alerted but not in combat quite yet. It makes sneaking feel very artificial, and the NPCs not very alive. Now, speaking of the NPCs being alive, I want to give certain NPCs advantages. So, like Clanfears, for instance, I want to give them a straight charge attack, where they're going to be able to go from point A to point B, assuming it's in line of sight, really, really quick. I want to make Hungers a lot more responsive with their cast time, maybe give them some kind of casting haste, where they can get their spells off in a quicker, more efficient manner, skip some animations, as it were, and so on and so forth. Ordinary bandits can stay ordinary bandits, but if someone is, say, one of the apostles of Dagoth Ur, and Dagoth Ur has tons of minions, by the way, they're called Dagoth this and Dagoth that, I think that they should all have unique powers and should be truly representative of their scary boss status that they're originally supposed to be. Speaking of scary boss status, I would like to see those NPCs, the Dagoths, regain the original status where they were pillars that supported Dagoth Ur. If you don't know, internal in the game's code, Dagoth Ur had an insurmountable amount of health, and Dagoth Ur would lose a bit of his max health for every one of his Dagoth followers you slew. So if you went around and slew all the Dagoth followers versus sneaking directly to Dagoth Ur, you would actually fight a weakened Dagoth Ur. He would still be a god. How can you kill a god? All that would still happen, but it would take quite a bit longer to get him down from his phase 1. Into the heart chamber, because he'd have all these followers that were more or less feeding him power. I thought it was a neat original mechanic. It was removed from the finished game. What I want to do is I want to see that on a more radical scale, where instead of removing 10 hit points, maybe it removes 100, and just give Dagoth Ur a ridiculous health pool to begin with. So if you want to skip all his followers and fight Dagoth Ur directly, it would be kind of amazing. And you know what? I think personally that if we then freed Dagoth Ur's followers, made them maybe not uncorrupted, but made them non-hostile at that point after Dagoth Ur died, maybe have them react differently. A couple of them turn non-hostile and the others are still, oh my god, you killed my master, prepare to die. There's all kinds of options for that. And I personally think that there's a lot of potential in it. So that's what I'd like to see personally. Alright, so anyone who's played Skyrim and used a mod known as TK Dodge and Attack Commitment will both understand this. What I'd like to do is I'd like to see those systems implemented into Morrowind, where, number one, you have the ability to double tap, say, A or D, to do a sidestep to either side. I'm not saying make it a dodge roll. I'm saying just engage the sneak animation for a second and then have the character zoom to one side or the other, like it goes, and it should be fairly simple, and any player should be able to do it. It's just that it should take nearly all your stamina if you fail the skill check, and there should be a roll based on athletics, acrobatics, skill stat, and what kind of armor you're wearing. So if you're wearing medium and heavy armor, well, you got 2 skill checks on you. But if you're just using no armor at all, you run it against the unarmored skill, and so on. It's just a case of it would drain huge amounts of stamina if that combined skill check were unsuccessful. But if you became more or less a master, you shouldn't be able to get hit because you are just that good, and it should barely drain any stamina per time you do it because you're a master of athletics, acrobatics, and you're fast with a mastery over the armor you're wearing. So in other words, you've been conditioned to do all this stuff. It's something that would reward your late game expertise, but be a kind of a clutch, oh my god, I'm about to die, I need to dodge this attack, in earlier situations. It could be abused with the combination of stamina potions. I don't have a problem with that. However, either way, if your stamina is at 5% or less remaining, you should be unable to use it. So, drink a stamina potion before you can dodge again, sorry. Now, shifting gears for a second, I'd like to see NPCs have personalities. Currently, all NPCs go, "Enwa!" and then attack you. I want to see some shopkeepers be cowardly, some be aggressive, very simple personalities. Just, farmers or certain townsfolk would run away. Anyone who maybe runs a sword shop or as a member of the Fighters Guild or a town guard, of course, they're all what are known as having a heroic personality where they just go get in your face and beat your crap. Now, as far as cowardly personality go, I'd like to see them pathfind themselves to the nearest town guard or other, heroic personality NPC. That heroic personality NPC should then aggro on you. And so what there should be a check where a cowardly personality NPC would aggro 2 or more aggressive NPCs. They would become aggressive themselves, and the reason is because they found their courage now that they're in a mob of people. I realize this would only really happen out in the world, say out in Balmora or one of the towns. In an interior cell, it's unlikely they would be able to gather that many people, but it's something I'd like to see as opposed to just having, you kill one person. It's just a little change I'd like to see, which breathes a little more life into things. Speaking of killing people, I'd like to see crime having witness. There's an Oblivion mod called Crime Has Witness, and this mod, the mechanics of it, were fully implemented into default Skyrim. Simply put, if you kill the witnesses to a crime, the crime is canceled. And so what I'd like to see is if you have a fleeing NPC via the cowardly trait, those NPCs that are aggroed, say he flees to a nearby member of the Fighters Guild, the member of the Fighters Guild is now a witness against you. Things like that. So you'd have to kill both of them in order for the crime to be cleared. Likewise, going back to my previous point, if you had health threshold, say at 0.5% health remaining, there's like one more attack and this NPC's going down, he should book it. Even if he's a town guard, he should run to the nearest guard, call, help, and then any nearby guards would run to assist. And so this concept of when you're almost dead, death is highly overrated, the bandits say. Well, maybe in this case, they could. I don't want to hear them say death is highly overrated. I don't even want to hear them do any kind of cry or call out other than help guards, maybe. I think that would be a neat feature, personally, is the concept of they're almost dead, so you either have to finish them off real quick, which is easy to do. It's very easy to overkill people in Morrowind. But let's just say that you somehow did manage to get them down to, 1% health left. Then they'd flee. They probably wouldn't be very good at it. They'd probably just get stabbed in the back by you. That's a good thing. But ultimately, heroic versus cowardly personalities could kick in again, I guess, but I'm not entirely sure how the implementation of it would work. I just think that that's another thing that breathes life into the personalities. Now, the next thing I'd like to see to keep Morrowind lively, because ultimately deaths do happen. NPCs do die. I'd like there to be a pool internally of named NPCs, maybe a list of 400 names. And when an NPC is killed, I'd say a minimum of 6 months, but a maximum of 2 years later, a replacement for that NPC would spawn. So say you killed the owner of a blacksmithing shop. 6 months to 2 years later, somewhere in that span, you come into that blacksmithing shop and it has a new owner. Now, the new owner has most of the properties of the original owner, other than maybe a different personality, a different appearance. He maintains the same job. This immigrant would more or less just fix the problem of the game world getting depopulated over time, especially if you're a werewolf, and you have to feed every night. I mean, ultimately, you feel the impact of your actions because for 6 months the area is empty. Obviously, only certain NPCs would respawn, those that provide critical either town or guild services, like Silt Striders would respawn. And when I say respawn, I actually mean replaced, because, there's a lot of mainland stuff, and ultimately people immigrate from the mainland. You know, there's a concept of an embargo going on, a kind of quarantine, but we're gonna say screw it. Over 6 months to 2 years is long enough for someone to sneak into Vardenfell. Now, the reason why I want to have this system is because I want NPCs to have beds or sleeping spots with sleeping schedules. So I want to see a blacksmithing shop closes at night, the blacksmith should go to bed. Ultimately, that would be the time to break into their shop. They wouldn't just be standing there at the counter. You should be able to steal from them while they're asleep. I don't have a problem with this concept. Ultimately, the economy needs to be rebalanced around that idea. I understand that's why Oblivion and Skyrim did what they did with stolen goods, but ultimately in Morrowind, you can have stolen goods. You can sell them to anyone other than their owner. If you sell them to their owner, they flip their shit and realize it's theirs, they report your crime, and that's reasonable to me. But if I were to sell this weaponsmith's stuff to the local armorsmith, the armorsmith doesn't know that I stole from the weaponsmith, so they just let the crime slide. And in that sense, there's no immediate detector of stolen goods or not stolen goods. That does change when you're wanted and you give yourself up. You either pay off your bounty or you go to jail. They do take your stolen goods away. So they clearly get a report from the local people. This was stolen, that was stolen. Okay, well, we just apprehended this guy and he has those things. So that makes sense. But ultimately, I think that simply reducing the value of stolen goods would fix that, so you wouldn't become this gold baron just by stealing everything a shop had because, you know, the NPC went to sleep, you broke in the middle of the night. I think that sleeping schedules is pretty much mandatory for, especially if you're playing a thief character, having the world feel real and good around you. So I'm not saying that you need to do a full-on Skyrim-esque, you watch them leave the counter and go to their bed. I'm saying you could do something like a mod, Morrowind Comes Alive, where it despawns the NPC in one spot and respawns them in another. So, you know, they go to the bar, then they go to bed. That is something that, you know, is very simple to do, and I'd be fine with it. I just like to see the mechanics integrated a little more to where they feel a little more seamless, I guess. Next thing I'd like to do, these are a couple minor things. They won't greatly impact it, but they're in terms of polish. First of all, because you can create your own spells, because you can buy a ton of spells and know this gigantic array of things, I want the ability to sort my spell book, not only by schools of magic, and whether it's a custom spell or not, but I'd like to be able to actually have a manual tab where I reorder the spells. So, say I want to drag these 3 custom spells I made up to the top of the spellcasting bar. I should be able to do that. Next up, I would like the ability to see my character's legs when I look down. It's a simple thing that newer games have, older games don't. Skyrim doesn't. What the hell, Skyrim? We actually introduced a mod called The Joy of Perspective, which was a piece of shit, and then we replaced it with an enhanced camera, which was better. Either way, it's something newer games are doing, and it's something Skyrim mods have done for a while. Let's implement it into Morrowind where I can see my character's feet. The next thing I'd like is alternate sounds when you take various types of hits. If I get hit with a spear, or somebody's fist, or a Clanfear's claws, doesn't matter. It makes the normal punching sound every time I get hit. And I think it sounds freaking stupid. I think that we need custom sound effects for impacts of various weapon types. That's just something that I'd like. It's under polish. Now, for some of you who have been watching my live streams, watching my videos for a while, they know about the colossal elephant in the room, and that is multiplayer. We are currently in the middle of testing the Morrowind multiplayer project, which is available on Steam. I'll have a link in the video description to it. I recommend pretty much everyone check it out because it's awesome. That said, there are people who will ask me, I don't understand why you'd ever want to play multiplayer in an Elder Scrolls game. It's about telling your story the way you want it. Well, let me ask you something. Are you married, or do you have a group of friends? Maybe you want to play the game with them? Me personally, I want to play Morrowind with my wife. I want to be able to be the sidekick in her adventure. We look at the adoring fan hilariously. But imagine if instead of being an adoring fan, he was a grizzled mercenary. Or someone who's like, yeah, I'll join you on your quest. And so you've got another person following you like an NPC, but let's just assume that you needed to go do two things at once for a specific quest. I'll go take care of that stuff in town while you go in the dungeon, you know, stuff like that. I'll meet you at the entrance. Things like that. Ultimately, it's about telling stories together. I said this 1,000 times. Role-playing alone is just intellectual masturbation. You can actually do some pretty neat things with solo roleplay, especially when you have an audience to witness it, aka YouTube videos. But nothing compares to role-playing in a group, role-playing that adventure together. And that's where I want to see Morrowind multiplayer shine. There's a couple things we got to do first. I'm going to talk about the framework of the multiplayer system. Then we'll talk about other stuff. So first of all, Morrowind multiplayer. We need to have the client, when you try to connect to a server, check the ESP file against the server's ESP to make sure everyone's on the same page, to prevent desynced content. So in other words, I'd like to see what's called a server vault, where your character data file is actually held on the server. And thus, you have your single player character, and then you have your server character. Now, ultimately, a lot of these functions can be offloaded to the player's local client, and then uploaded periodically as saves. Now, what I'd like to see is on the client's side, I'd like to see a set of subfolders created for each server they log on to. And the idea behind that is they could download a separate set of ESP files from the author, maybe including texture files, things like that. Pretty much anything that the client detects they don't have, that the server instructed them that they need to have. This would be downloaded into that server-specific folder. So when they connect to that server, it would use that loadout with those data files, not the vanilla loadout that they have, or the modded loadout that they decided to get for themselves. It would all be dependent on the server. This way, a group of players could join somebody who's modded out their game, and they would all gain those same mods, and they wouldn't use the mods that they were using. This would allow content to be synced properly. And I feel that that is a priority and is the bare bones requirement of the whole thing. Now, I'd like a button that you could press in the game to export your character. Exporting your character is fairly important. You were able to do it in Neverwinter Nights when you connected to one of those persistent world servers. You'd basically have your own little campaign. You'd enjoy it in Neverwinter Nights, but ultimately you wanted to take that character on solo adventures later. No problem. Hit the export character button. It makes a copy of your save file from that online world and puts it into, you know, an alternate profile for your offline mode. It's not a mandatory thing, but it definitely would be nice. Now that we've finished talking about the foundations for the multiplayer, let's talk about a couple nice-to-haves. It would be nice to see other players as bips on your map, and let that be a server on or off option. I'd like to be able to see PvP be a, again, server toggleable option, to where you have friendly fire on or off. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of little nitpicks that I'd like, but I'm going to talk about a role-playing system that I think multiplayer Morrowind can implement, and that would be awesome. Those familiar, again, with Neverwinter Nights are familiar with the ability to log on to a server as the game master. Dungeons & Dragons players will remember this as the DM, but anyone who plays more than just D&D will, of course, call it the GM. As a GM, you should have the ability to turn yourself invisible permanently and be uninteractable with objects and other players. So this should perhaps be the default state for the GM. The GM would have no clip. The GM wouldn't, it wouldn't exist in the world physically unless they wanted to. They'd still have the ability to pick stuff up and interact with objects as they saw fit, but they wouldn't be able to attack things because that would cause massive contradictions. Ultimately, their biggest ability would be to possess things. So what I would like to see is the GM's ability to enter another NPC, basically drive them. And it would disable their AI package for the duration of time that they were controlled. And it would resume their AI package when they were released. But this would allow a GM to more or less guide a player, be able to initiate dialogue with them, things like that. Obviously, there should be a text chat box, and anything that the GM types into that text chat box should appear in kind of a word bubble over the NPC's head. It should allow for impromptu replies to the player or players. Obviously, the GM should have the ability to alter NPCs' packages. For example, if they clicked on an NPC, they could click on this button called Make Follower, and then it would give them a selection tool, and they'd be able to click on a different player, so it would make this NPC a follower of that guy. Likewise, there should be a set of encounters, certain Daedra that could be spawned, all entirely based on the GM's tools. And the GM's tools would allow a role-playing session to be told in Vvardenfell, or even Tamriel Rebuilt's content, through the Morrowind mainland. If Province Cyrodiil or Skyrim Home of the Nords got going, maybe even just release their landmass without any NPCs in it, a role-playing system using this GM toolkit could actually populate it and then create a little role-playing story for people so that they could have D&D tabletop-esque adventures throughout Tamriel. But ultimately, because it all relies on that specific framework, anyone joining the server would be using the same packages and textures and scripts and everything that the server was running. And what this means is that the person running the campaign could actually create their own mod using the Open Morrowind creation kit, which is real, by the way. It's much, much better than regular Morrowind's creation kit. And through that Open Morrowind creation kit, more or less tell their own story and create a dungeon where there wasn't a dungeon before, so on and so forth. There are tons and tons of options. The possibilities are nearly endless. And I would love to see what a role-playing group could do in Vvardenfell, in the mainland Morrowind, and in pretty much anywhere else anyone wants to create. Is anyone familiar with Enderal for Skyrim? That is a total conversion mod, because there's a mod called Arctwind, which takes place in the same world. It's Morrowind. I mean, we could talk about Narim, which was the Oblivion one, but this isn't what we're talking about. I'd like to be able to see Arctwind role-playing happen. That would be cool. My point is that with some very simple tools and some more complex systems in place, Morrowind multiplayer could be a great, great thing. Obviously, some of the basic things like trade windows or inspection sheets would be nice, but they aren't mandatory at this time. I'm not saying make a Morrowind MMORPG. I'm saying simply create a client-server-based system where the server controls most of the stuff, and ultimately we can have adventures together. Thank you all for watching episode 1 of What If Morrowind Was Good. Next episode, I'll be talking about the various guilds and some of the ways that the NPCs could act differently in public or react better to the player. Until then, check the social media links for more content. Keep an eye out for my Morrowind live streams. I'm going to be doing these for at least 1 or 2 more weeks. And until then, I will see y'all next time.